Thank you guys so much for joining us for another SaaS Connect here today. I'm Lindsay Ward. I'm the Managing Director of CSA. You've probably seen me popping around in Slack and emailing all of you. We are going to be discussing how to build co-marketing partnerships through podcasting today. And we've got one of the best on to help us out with that. Jorgovan of Content Allies is here to have a great conversation with us about just that topic. As you guys know, podcasting has become something at the forefront for gathering new business. Typically, we've seen that at more of a B2C level, but today we're going to discuss how you can use that to really create those strong co-marketing partnerships in your organization. So, Jake, I kind of want to dive into that topic first of all. We have seen podcasting be more B2C in the past. How is that starting to change for the B2B community?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're seeing. The way I look at it is B2B always lagged behind B2C a few years. And thus is, I think we're currently seeing the explosion in B2B podcasting at the moment. From our side, I mean, our business is purely B2B. We don't take on B2C shows. And we're now podcasting with companies like Meta, Siemens Energy, Alibaba, Gusto, General Dynamics, a lot of very large B2B companies. And all those shows, even some of those that are kind of also B2C companies, the shows that we're creating for them are very B2B. And so I think what we're seeing is a lot of companies starting to see the value that this can provide from a B2B standpoint as well. And I can dive a lot into the different ways that you can use them in that angle, but they're very powerful in that sense. And I'm just seeing a huge trend in the market shifting toward it right now.
With that value in mind, how do you start creating that kind of partnership and those value offerings for the people that you're co-marketing that with?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing that's inherently about podcasting is that it is a social medium. It's inherently, you're going to be pulling guests onto your podcast. There are some companies that have chosen to do podcasting as, we're going to interview the people within our company and really make this more of a thought leadership focus. There are use cases for that. We're working with like a really large consulting firm that's B2B, and that's their angle that they've taken. But I would say by and large, a majority of what we see B2B companies is that they want to create a show to really strengthen some of their biggest partnerships, to co-market with some of their biggest partnerships or customers, or use it as an account-based marketing angle to kind of build relationships. And in various different sizes of companies will have different objectives, and we can kind of dive into that. But at the end of the day, you are collaborating on this piece of content with someone. And when you collaborate with them, like there's so many ways that you can get value out of that. And we can dive into a lot of these here, but inherently it is social. You start with them, and then there's so many ways you can extract value out of that.
And you really, in that way, make yourself thought leaders in that community as you're partnering along. But I know something that, we've struggled with in the past, and other companies where I've created podcasts to develop partnerships. When we do that with a partner in mind, we want to keep the content organic and make sure that we're not just pushing sales at everybody. What is the best way to do that to make sure that it's not just a pitch every single time?
Yeah. So I'll hit on kind of some of the tiers of that we typically see kind of partnerships go towards. So what I would say is for smaller to mid-sized businesses, we see a lot of podcasting being used, and essentially kind of a way to look at it is honestly account-based marketing. You're building relationships with your ideal customers. You're creating a show and a strategy that's focused around your buyer persona. So, if you're trying to target CFOs, you create the CFO podcast or some more original name than that, and you interview them. And through that, you kind of build relationships there. The key thing, if you do that angle, is, as you said, like it needs to be natural. You do not make it a sales funnel or a sales pitch. Most of the time out of those, what'll happen is at some point in that conversation, it's like, oh, you work with so-and-so company. What do you do? Let me talk. That fits with what we're looking for. It's not. And what we find is honestly, like most of the people that use this approach, I would say on average, we see people convert 5 to 10% of the interviews they have into some level of like a customer business relationship. And we've seen some people where it's crazy, like just by opening those doors, they've like 50% plus of their guests have turned into customers. And it's pretty amazing there, because it's just, you're starting a relationship in a natural way. And you don't want to go into a sales pitch, but you just want to have a good conversation, talk with them, understand their problems. And if it naturally happens, that's great, but we definitely do not recommend pushing it. I have been on the other side of that, where I was interviewed and then someone like turned into a pitch, and I was just like, I just don't like this. And so I think it just needs to be very natural. Just give an example, like when we do this with our show, where it's like, hey, I really enjoy this conversation. Like, what you're doing, awesome. If you guys ever want to talk podcasting, let us know, but no worries. And we'll let you know when the episode goes live. And like that little teaser leads to a ton, and it's not overly pushy. It's just, hey, we're here. This is aware. So that's like kind of the account-based marketing, which is what I would say if people are kind of on the smaller company size, you're say 200 employees less. What I say, once you start getting 200 plus employees, 500 plus, 1,000 plus employees, you're in a larger organization, that approach tends to be less utilized. And it's just because I think you're hitting a point where you really are pushing out content into the market, and it tends to shift to, how do we get eyeballs? How do we, this really become, I think for that ABM to work, sales and marketing have to be tightly close together. Mm-hmm. And at a larger organization, we typically see people shifting more toward content marketing partnerships. And so at that level, some of the things you can look at doing if you're at a slightly larger organization is, and you can still do these at the smaller level too, but some of the tactics are, getting on other influential people, pulling on partners. And, there's the common tactic of obviously giving them social content to share this out. You want them to share this out to their audience. But one tactic I don't think a lot of people are aware of or think about, but that is super powerful, is offering to give them an article and letting them embed the podcast on their website. And this is like a really interesting co-marketing partnership opportunity there, where I have been blown away by the level that this tactic has worked at. We've gotten articles on bostonconsultinggroup.com, on kpmg.com. Like, we have very big companies that are saying, yeah, you interviewed one of our leadership team members. Yeah, if you give us an article, we'll publish it on there. And so you get the content live on their site. You get this basically essentially distributed out through them. And you get backlinks. So your SEO team will love you for that. And so those are kind of some of the angles that approach can really work at any level. And the account-based marketing, as I mentioned, tends to be slightly smaller orgs, but still very powerful.
And do you recommend doing that early on as part of your strategy when you're creating a podcast? I know that some people, they're starting with very small and scrappy teams, so adding another layer of an article onto it can be more difficult for them. What's the best way to go about that?
I think it can be difficult. That's the thing is what I would always say with podcasting, and like we exist as a podcast production agency because there's a lot of moving parts to these things. It's like you have writers, you have designers, audio editors, video editors, and it's like there's just so many different pieces, QA, people to check everything, and then scheduling guests and coordinating it all. So there's a lot of different people involved, which is, I guess, why we exist as an agency. But if you're doing this internally, then I do think it is kind of a walk before you run, but also it's also something where you can go back. If you, if you get 10 episodes in and you say, hey, we really do want to leverage that, get some articles on our guest website. Like, you can go back and say, hey, we just brought on a new team member to help us out with this. We wanted to see, would you like, an article of that interview on your site? You can still retroactively go back and do that as well. So, don't be overwhelmed. I think that's the hard part with podcasting, is there's so much, and it's like podcast is like the core, and there's a million things you can do around it, which is why I think that this is blowing up in B2B. Yeah. Because everyone's realizing, build your podcast, and so much content, so many strategies can be derived from that. But I always think you don't bite off more than you can chew at the beginning. Just get going. You can always optimize and improve along the way. So.
And really targeting partners that would be the best to write those articles with, because if something that, we found, and I found at different companies when we've been creating podcasts, when we've been collaborating and co-marketing with partners, is really to go for the ones that you're already identifying is very engaged with you. They're already on to do another podcast with you. They want to co-market with you on a different event, really leaning on them to do it. But identifying those as well is another kind of layer of that whole strategy to create those strong partnerships. And something that I'm curious from your end is if you've seen from companies that are doing this podcast approach, if they're taking that and scaling it to create a stronger partnership that gives not only value, but also a revenue up for both of them.
Yeah. So some other angles that we've seen, I mean, if you look at the small business side, a lot of times you're on the smaller end, it is kind of reaching out and trying to find and build those partnerships. What we find interesting is as you go up slightly larger organizations, it's starting to look at who those existing partners are. And I'll share some other kind of examples of ways you can actually do those episodes to make value out of that. Mm-hmm. One we've seen is integrations and doing episodes about integrations. It's an amazing way to kind of create content for both parties to talk about what the integration can do. And then combined with this could be its own approach where you can combine it in there, but also kind of like a case study with someone there. So if you're able to pull in a customer who has successfully driven value because you integrated your app with theirs and what it's done, then you're kind of creating this really valuable content in and of itself that's valuable to both team members. And that's kind of a key thing, I think, to hit on there is just, like that goes, I think, a very long way. And with that, I think the thing is that when you go into these episodes, it's not just like, hey, let's go create a piece of content with so-and-so. Mm-hmm. It's like, think about the objective. Like, what is the objective you have for this episode or this collaboration? Because I think where we're seeing a lot of people and how they're thinking about B2B podcasting, and this is like the mindset I'm trying to break in the market is, if anyone was around in content marketing in the early days of 2005 to 2010 when HubSpot was blowing up, everyone was just like blog every week. And it took a long time for people to realize like that doesn't actually work just alone. It can.
Anything you're thinking.
Yeah. And it's like that. And that's how people are thinking of podcasting. Like if I'm gonna do podcasting, I got to do it weekly and I got to build an audience and get them to come back. But one of the big things I'm a believer of is that most people are not going to listen to your B2B podcast like they do their favorite true crime podcast. They're just not going to be regular listeners checking in on that all the time. You might, and if you do, that's awesome. But that tends to be more of a B2C audience. And the way I recommend most B2B companies to think about is like, what is the standalone business objective of each one of these? It's like if you're going to do a marketing or a blogging or content plan, you're not just going to, create a bunch of stuff just to create it. You're thinking like, okay, what is the SEO purpose of this? Or is this going to help my sales team? Is this going to be a customer success piece that we can share with people? So think about each piece, as you go into it.
And what's the best way to start on that? What is the best way to create that process?
Yeah, I think it comes down to ultimately deciding the strategy and the objectives of the show for you. Are you going to try to do account-based marketing? Is your goal to build relationships with new customers or partners? Is this your goal to strengthen relationships and co-market with existing partners because you're at a larger organization where there's enough of an ecosystem that you just want to simply go around and strengthen and co-market what already exists? Or are you taking the approach where you're wanting to do really kind of showcase the thought leadership of your team and kind of really pull out your experts within? But I think it comes down to trying to really decide like what angle you're taking with your show, deciding that objective on the front end, and then starting to look at every episode. Like whenever we're doing a show with like one of our large enterprise clients, we look at, okay, here's the idea, here's the guests. What's the call to action? Like what are we trying to drive people to? Like what business value is this episode going to create? Okay, that's going to talk about this product. Cool. That's going to talk about this integration. Okay, great. But what you sometimes will find is you're like, well, this is an awesome guest. What is this going to do? And that's when you start to like have to step back and think like, does that actually make sense? Because you'll sometimes end up in those situations where you have someone really nice and cool, and it could be an interesting episode, but there's really no business use case there. And then at that point you decide, do I create thought leadership content for creating it? Or do I really need to think about how to steer this toward a business objective or some call to action that's going to be useful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That point where it's an interesting conversation, but are we actually driving anything from it? And typically in those cases, I found personally that a personal case study with some kind of pain point that they've experienced is usually the best way to get people into that. Because it's still, I mean, when you're having conversations like you and I are, you want it to feel organic, because you want the audience to say, hey, that's also me. I've also, I've been trying to deal with this. I've been trying to fix this. So when you're having a conversation with somebody and maybe you're doing a little bit of coaching with your partner that you're podcasting with, what is typically the best way to draw that? Oh, and also everybody in the audience, feel free to pop questions into the Q&A. We can answer them as we go through this. I know that this is something that many, many businesses are struggling to put together and to succeed with. So definitely pop everything down there.
Yeah, I think it starts from a very much a brainstorming piece there. Typically, this will be derived from, here's the topic we want to hit, what guests could fill that. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes it's, here's the guests we have, what topics do we want them to hit? Either can go really well. But that tends to be the two kind of angles that you will kind of come into topic planning from. But most of the time we're starting and we're brainstorming, hey, here's 20, 30 episode ideas we have. These are things we want to hit toward. And then we start trying to come up with guests, and we have that. And then it's the hard part, I think, also with podcasting is it's very dependent on people outside of your organization. Especially if you're going to be collaborating externally. And so you have to be fluid and flexible with it. Not everybody's going to say yes. Some people will say, yes, I can do that in 4 months from now. And then you're just like, so you kind of always have to be somewhat trying to intersect your plans with what actually is received well from the market or people out there and how they respond. But yeah, typically start with episodes and decide for guests there, or start with guests and try to pair them with topics that you fit your objectives.
And kind of going with that, based on what's happening in the world, because I know I've had many conversations we've been to a few events the last few weeks, and there's been topics that are just coming up to the forefront that would be really interesting to have on a podcast. Co-selling, for example, with partnerships is something that I'm hearing more and more and more. So to really listen to those conversations at Inbound and SaaStr and whatever conference you're going to, and finding people there to bring in to have a podcast with and create that partnership and that marketing content with would be an incredible strategy to take part in. But what have you seen from companies that you've worked with to gather those ideas and really turn them into an episode?
Yeah, most of the time, I think what it involves is just being really working across the various departments in your organization and finding out what's going on, finding out who's got some new product launch or who has some marketing initiatives. And trying to, I think that's the hardest part we see with companies is it's just about navigating the other departments to know what's going on. It's like, oh, hey, this product team has a launch happening in 2 months. Okay, we should probably try to collaborate with them on this. Or, hey, there's going to be, there's a big tent pole, and the PR team has this big tent pole. They're going to be doing a ton of stories. And if you talk with these teams and you just say, hey, like, we have this podcast, the medium is to enable us to collaborate with others. And typically, have a one pager about your show, what you're doing, and saying, this is our show. This is how you can collaborate with us. This is why you want to collaborate with us. This is what we can do. And really just trying to set up calls with people all throughout the organization, try to look and ask people for introductions to other people that might want to collaborate. Mm-hmm. That has tended to be what we've seen is just like the challenge, I think, for mainly our contacts at these companies who are trying to navigate it. And so we try to arm them with support. We create one-pagers, materials about the guests or about the podcast to try to support with that. But it really does come down to just learning what's happening in the organization and where you can best be a partner and help support them.
A case study for why this podcasting initiative would help create these partnerships. Mm-hmm. I know that's something that many teams who are trying to create partnership departments in their own companies have to do. They really have to show their value and show that, they need the support from the company and this kind of buy-in. And getting that from other members of your department in terms of these kind of collaborations, that's equally as important because it's all moving toward the same goal for your company to create that value for you and then your external partners as well. But I'd be curious to know with the companies that, you've worked with in the past and what you've seen with podcasting, when they're creating those relationships and they have kind of that one-off podcast together, how are they keeping that partnership going after the fact?
Yeah, so a lot of that is then figuring out how to ultimately kind of co-promote those episodes and get that together. So I think there is a piece around that. And, I would say, to be honest, like from where we are, we're often like in the marketing team kind of working alongside the partners.
Mm-hmm.
We're often seeing these being used in some various level of almost kind of like relationship building or negotiation as well. We've had some teams where they're like, hey, we're going to use this as like, we're renegotiating this contract and we're going to throw in this podcast interview and this collaboration here as like another piece that we're putting into like our kind of relationship here as we kind of try to solidify this. And so it's interesting. I'd say we often are working with the marketing teams who end up collaborating with those partner managers. Mm-hmm. But often we see this being like kind of the start of what honestly becomes a co-marketing campaign that typically spans for a few months. And at that point, it is kind of often handed to the partnership team. So I can't speak too much there, but that's kind of what we're seeing. And what also I think is interesting is we've seen a lot of, we're doing a lot more analytics and tracking around these. So putting in like bit.ly links to track how effective these campaigns are as well. And then we're running ad campaigns to boost some of these episodes. And so those are also things that are helping drive it a bit more as well. And in some cases, we've had the partners put ad campaigns behind these. We did an integration episode for one of our clients. It was really cool that we put ad budget behind it and they did as well. And so that was really interesting to see both parties kind of bring something to the table. But I would say most often these have been kind of campaign driven and really in supporting where we're often supporting partnership teams.
It's interesting to see that shift to partnership teams with this kind of content that you're putting out. And when you're connecting with other partnership teams, the typical focus is how can I grow affiliate marketing or channel sales partnerships throughout my company? But I think now that we're moving into this new era of partnerships, we're seeing more and more ways that we can collaborate and use partnerships to bring companies together. And the larger companies that you see with the podcasts that they have, they're doing really interesting interviews with sometimes even their competitors. And it's kind of bringing a new focus on topics that they otherwise wouldn't have touched previously. I'm interested to hear about companies that have partnered together. Do you think there's value in two companies with, very large podcasts coming together and doing a co-marketed episode?
Yeah, that's actually another approach I forgot to mention is that we've seen a lot of times when both companies have a podcast mm-hmm. to do one interview and publish it across both podcasts. And so this is also another really common approach if you're working with another partner or just another influencer, maybe a podcaster in your niche, is to go to them and, hey, interview them there. But hey, we'll also give you this episode so you can republish this on your side. We've pulled that off quite a few times. And it's, again, another really great way to get a ton more because you're now getting that into both podcast feeds. And it's not like SEO content where there's a negative to duplicating it in the podcast world. The apps do not care. Mm-hmm. So typically, you can, or if you have, you have someone from your team guest appear on someone else's podcast, you can publish that on yours as well and repurpose that into an episode. And so those, I think, are some really phenomenal ways that we're seeing people with like large podcasts collaborate together and use those as assets.
And what are they typically doing in terms of topic for those?
Typically, what we'll see is one of them brings, the other onto a show. So, for example, we worked with one of our clients. They brought on one of their integration partners. They talked on an integration. We published that on their channel, and then they also published that on their client's podcast as well. And what they'll typically do is they'll on their partner's channel. And so on their partner's podcast, they'll do a custom intro and just say, hey, I was just on so-and-so's podcast and we talked about XYZ. We're going to republish it here so you can hear the full interview and let them kind of dive in. And it just kind of creates another outlet for that content and more awareness of it.
That's awesome. Something that I, just going back to something that we said about building these podcasts and partnership teams, really collaborating with them. If I'm coming from a partner team and I want to present this to my company as a way that we can start creating those relationships, maybe we don't have a podcast, maybe we need to pull on a podcast that we currently have. What's the best approach to be able to do that, to bring that to a stakeholder?
Yeah, what I would say is the value of showing podcasts, there's a lot of different angles. I would go speak to some podcast agencies because I think you will get educated a lot in the sales process on that. So feel free to reach out to us at Content Allies or reach out to any others. But what we find is most people going into this world don't know what they don't know. And I think when you speak to some agencies, even if you decide to produce it internally, you're going to be much more aware of what is possible. So some of those key value points that you're going to want to hit on when you bring that is, this is a collaboration channel. We're going to be, using this to collaborate with key partners, everything along the lines that we've been talking about today. The other key kind of message point is like, this really is the start of like a bigger marketing thing. So the conversations are about partnerships, and then we can co-market together, but then we can also repurpose this into social media clips, social videos. We can create articles, SEO articles based off of these. We can create videos for a YouTube channel. We can do short snippets. We can create case studies for these. We can partner with integration teams. It's about painting that vision. And I think what is leading to the boom in podcasting is that we're seeing like partnership teams or marketing teams go forward and say, and like the business case just makes sense. It's like, hey, instead of having a video team and then having an article team and then having a podcast team, it's like, no, you do the podcast and your videos, your articles, your social contents, all of this stuff is derived from this one channel. And I think that is where a lot of B2B companies are going, and why they're shifting toward podcasting is because it's an efficient use of time and resources to put this all together, because you're getting content across so many different fronts. When previously video writing were kind of these two segmented worlds, you're now seeing them kind of all mashed together and deriving from the podcast. So I think that's like the really big selling point. And then I think also to do a competitive analysis, look at what are your competitors doing? Do they have podcasts? What other companies in your space are doing, and trying to just find some other examples. And I think that's a really great point to see, because I think what you're going to see is nearly almost all businesses. I would say over the next 5 years, we're going to see nearly every B2B company have a podcast, just like they have a blog or a webinar series. I think that's where we're moving. And so I think a lot of people are going to feel quite left behind ultimately if they're not there. And so just showing the fact that your competitors are probably already doing this helps a lot as well.
That's an interesting thought. And also gathering those thought leaders that they have on, because, there will be those 10 to 20 people that are typically on those podcasts across multiple channels, especially in SaaS, because we have so much overlap with our companies and our leaders that leaning on the experience of others and building from that seems like the best way to go forward with it. But you're so right. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, it's a space that we're constantly having to educate on. It's very new to a lot of people. And that's where I think just trying to find someone that can help or guide you, or at least just talking to some people before moving forward. It is possible to do internally. It's a lot of work. But I think there's also a lot of agencies or services that you can kind of lean on to support with that as well. So.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, really taking the time to research and to find those people who can actually help you move forward with that podcast and create it for your company, if not already created. But it's an interesting shift to see, because when I started in SaaS, every single SaaS company had a blog. We had a blog. We would write on that blog 2-3 times a week and just be churning out content. And at the same time, we had a podcast, but it wasn't something that we were necessarily focusing on. But it had way more of an impact on our company than the blogs that we were putting out. And I don't know if that has something to do with the audio aspect of it. You really feel like you're connecting with somebody when you're hearing a conversation. But, from that organic, just human to human perspective, I'm curious what you think about podcasting itself as a medium and why it's taking over in that way.
I think so. And I think it's a very, it's an easy thing to digest. I think especially in like a world where we're all getting busier and busier, it's like you can just go listen to a podcast while you're making lunch or prepping dinner or something, and going on a walk or going for a drive. And I think there is some level there where it is different. And I think people, it's not to say people don't read anymore, and that there definitely is a great place for SEO content. Yeah. Still is extremely powerful, but I think there's just different use cases for it. I think it's harder to convey an idea or convey what we talked about here in an article. It would take so many words for someone to read, but there's also, cases where people want a very specific tactical thing. I think that's for writing, but I think for bigger ideas, I think podcasting is a very, very strong medium for that. And it also just kind of creates, I think, a bit more trust as well. So
that's an interesting point of view. I was at an event recently, and one of the hosts of a podcast that I listened to was actually at that event, and you could just see the amount of people who would stop and hear his voice and come up and say, "Oh, hey, like it's you. I've been listening to you for weeks, years, whatever it was," because it's that connection that they have.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've seen even in like the smaller businesses, we have one. And what I think is really interesting about B2B and an expectation to set is most B2B shows do not get insane download numbers. They just don't. And it's not going to be, if you have a B2B show in the thousands, like you are rocking it. But most B2B shows, like I will tell you, there's a lot of shows we do provide tremendous business value, and they average 20 to 100 downloads an episode. And that sounds like abysmally low, but the relationships are still there. And what's crazy is like, we have one of these shows, like they consistently average under 100 downloads, but they're at episode like 80. And he goes out to conferences and people are like, God, I listen to every episode, because he's at this small niche conference for this like fintech subscription business. And it's like such a weird little small niche that it's like, okay, like those 50 people that do listen to every episode, like you've got some heavy hitters in that list of 50. And so like, that's what I think is interesting to see, is that B2B, like don't expect to be having like thousands of downloads and realize you probably don't even want 1,000 downloads. If you have the right 50 people listening to that will provide tremendous business value over trying to run like ads to just get a bunch there. For a small company, it's like that will go a long way. And, as you get to a bigger company, you probably need to hit KPIs, and there are ways to drive your podcast, get in front of more of the right people. But at the small business level, you can definitely do lower numbers and still have a tremendous business impact.
That's an interesting thing, actually, to have that kind of narrow and deep audience with your podcast, because you could have, hundreds of thousands of downloads, but who is it actually going to, who actually knows about this podcast? Is it actually making that kind of difference? It's a really distinct thing between, as you were saying, B2C and B2B. That kind of difference in value is measured so differently across the board.
Yeah, there's another one of our shows is in the hospitality, like event hotel industry niche, consistently averaging around 100 downloads an episode. And this has driven like millions in revenue for them at this point through relationships, through audience, through all of it. And just like the prestige and thought leadership that it's brought there. And it is just really amazing to see, even at those download numbers without any ads or any promotion behind it. That's just pure kind of organic from building it, what that value that can drive to a business.
And do they find that they're bringing on more people in terms of customers for their business, or more relationships of people who could actually be on the podcast?
Yeah, this particular one, they've used it sometimes in account-based marketing to build new relationships. They have used it a ton to speak to try to get more contacts at existing companies. Mm-hmm. So, they may already have a contract with a large enterprise, and they would, interview other decision makers at that company. And now they're expanded into different regions, different departments, everything there. And so, again, and that's where it kind of just comes down to really defining that strategy for your show at the beginning, figuring out how you're going to use it. And that can, if you nail the strategy, if you get that right on the front end, it can go a super long way.
That's amazing. We've kind of talked a little bit about, the different ways that you can create it, but I'd love to reiterate just, kind of as we get toward the end of this episode, the best way to start beginning that partnership process for creating this podcast, and just a few key things to keep in mind along the way as you're doing it.
Yeah. The biggest thing is, I think, defining the strategy of the show and making sure that the show is going to be something that enables you to showcase and interview the people that you want to. And I think that this is honestly something that I see a lot of people mess up. I'll tell you, we had one customer that they do a lot of video production and like kind of customer storytelling, video testimonials. They were like, oh, we want to call it the customer storytelling podcast or something like that. And I was like, well, no one's going to want to be a guest on that because no one else feels like an expert in that. Really, your customers are, high-level SaaS marketers or marketers at enterprise companies. And so you want to build something that is going to showcase them, like a leaders of marketing or some sort of type of show that's going to feature and focus on your ideal persona. So the way we also like to think about it is you either want the show to be thematically something that is open enough where you can use it for the various use cases you want to. You got to think, would the guests that I want to connect want to be on that show? Or is it something that kind of almost like ego boosts those particular people? It's kind of like literally you're building it around like there's like hospitality leaders is a show we have where we interview people in that space. And it lets us, that particular podcast connect with those people. So those are kind of two of the big angles, but some of the things, it's like, hey, we're going to make it, if I were to make the Content Allies show, like not many people are going to want to be on the Content Allies show, but they do want to be on the Leaders of B2B show. Because that, like, again, the way that entire show is positioned is something that is desirable to be on versus, trying to make something that's me focused from a podcast brand. So I think that that's strategically one of the biggest mistakes I see people make where it's like, hey, no one's saying yes to be on my show. And it's like, well, you called the show like the name of your company. And that's no one likes that,
Yeah.
With Gusto, we created, I think it was the SMB Tech Innovators podcast or something. It was something along those lines. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was something around the people that they wanted to be on the show, not the Gusto podcast. It's kind of thinking through it there of who you want to collaborate with and have them be on the show.
Which I think is always the best way to do it. If you're going to do something in that way to collaborate, those who are coming into it, they don't necessarily want to hear about you. They want to hear from others and from peers and to know that it's speaking out to them.
Exactly.
Anything else that you would recommend in terms of getting started?
I think that honestly covers a lot of it there. I mean, I think the biggest thing, like I said, it's probably going to be hard to kind of fully do this on your own. There's a lot of pieces. So there's ranges from hiring someone to just support with, just some audio production to hiring agencies like Content Allies, where we can kind of do the entire sphere of it. But the biggest thing is I would say, go talk to some people and see what level of support you need. Because I would say I have not seen any companies that are 100% doing the show internally. They are handing off content repurposing, they're handing off audio production or video production. There's something they're handing off because it's a lot of skills to pull this off internally. So just try to talk to people and figure out what gaps you have in your team and where you need support.
Awesome. I just want to thank Jake so much for coming in today. This was an incredible podcast. It's going to be super valuable for the rest of the community. We will also be putting it out into the coming weeks. So make sure to look out for that recording. And then also, if you're not part of CSA, please jump in and join. It is free to join. And make sure you check out our events. We will be in Dublin at SaaStock doing a CSA meetup, and then also one in New York as well. And that is to come. So thank you so much, Jake, for being here with us, and hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, everybody.